All right, today is March the 15th, 2022, and Azania is going to take my place over here to continue interviews. Okay, awesome. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, I think last time we were going to start off with talking about the resistance to the draft.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I think we discussed the attempt by the U.S. government to draft General Baker and how we organized what we call the September 10th movement, because that was the date on which he was the U.S. government.
Can you hold on a second?
All right.
Mom logged in, so can you pause it and stop recording?
Okay.
Mom? Into Zoom over there. Okay, never mind. Okay, can you stop the recording and then record again? So then,
Okay. Let me see.
or never mind. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It's right. Okay, we can just start again.
Okay.
So can you tell us a little bit about your experience being drafted, and along with General Baker and any of your other comrades, friends that may have experienced the same?
Okay. As I mentioned in our last episode, the U.S. government military attempted to draft General Baker, received the notice to report to the induction center. And our response was to create a movement. We call it the September 10th movement because that was the date on which he was to report to the induction center. And so we had a couple of weeks to pass pamphlets and posters around the city and Black neighborhoods.
Who created the pamphlets and posters, and what was the content on them? What were you trying to, what kind of objective were you trying to get out of that action?
Okay, well, number one, we were sending to the Black community that the Vietnam War was a war to be protested against. It was a racist war. It was the illegal war. It violated international law. And where there was also the message was that young Black men should resist the draft, right? So that was our message, draft, resist the draft. And so what we put on our pamphlets is that on September 10th, 50,000 angry Black people will show up at the attention of the induction center in support of General Baker and to express our opposition to United States imperialism as amplified by the war in Southeast Asia. So on September 10th, only about 9 or 10 of us showed up. However, it had the effect of compelling the authorities, police authorities reacted with fear And so they mobilized thousands of police personnel because we put on there would be 50,000 angry Black folks. And this was in before had been a series of rebellions, Black rebellions in the city since 64 and 65. And so
Can you tell us a little bit about the other rebellions and were you involved in that as well with General Baker and your other?
Okay, there was a rebellion in New York City in 1964, in Watts in LA in 1965. So there was a lot of turmoil in Black communities, and of course there were many civil rights demonstrations, during that time, and the rise of Black consciousness and Black nationalism. And it was during this turbulent period that the U.S. government was on edge, right? And they wanted to really repress any expressions of rebellion. Okay, and so we kind of capitalized on their paranoia and wrote on our leaflets that 50,000 angry Black folks would show up at the induction center. So they mobilized a lot of their police agents, anticipating maybe a very large angry crowd on that date. However, only about 9 or 10 people of close friends and comrades of General Baker, including myself, showed up.
So what was that? What was that experience like being in that space with such large police presence and that 50,000 people didn't show up? So I assume that like the police officers and National Guard or whomever were present, that they, came in ready to fight. So can you tell me a little bit about what that was like? Like,
Well,
did
first,
you?
Okay, well, first, usually they have a police presence, and then they have others on alert, okay, because they monitor and surveil that situation. And during that day, they adjust their visible force based on traffic and who's showing up, okay. So on that day, we didn't have a physical clash with the police. Right? We were there just standing with signs, and so within our rights of freedom of expression, to express our opposition to the draft and the Vietnam War. And so after that event, then there was no sort of clashes at that site. Now, in my case, what happened is this: the U.S. government was drafting men up to the age of 26. At 18.
And how old were you at that time?
At that time, and I was 25. Right, 65. I was 24. Right? And because that was 1960, 1964, 65. Yeah, I was 24. And of course, that means I was in that population group I was targeted. Okay. Up until that time. So here's why the law.
Do you remember getting your draft letter? Or did you receive like a letter in the mail?
Yes,
how were you notified? And can you tell me sorry? Okay.
I was notified through a letter. Okay. In the letter, they specified a date and a place to show up. And on that date and place, I showed up. And at the site, the site was for an examination, a physical examination and a medical examination. So, if you didn't show up, then somebody, then military military police or something will appear at your home. So my first line of experience is that I had to figure out at what point and how I'm going to resist the draft. So
So was that your first thought when you had like opened the letter? What was kind of your first thoughts like flooded in your mind when you received the letter?
when I received the letter, first I knew I was going to try illegal maneuvers, right, to resist.
Were you
So
already planning this out before you had received the letter? And that was something that you were kind of like discussing. Did you discuss that with family or friends prior?
uh, no, I mean everybody, like General Baker and other comrades, knew that we were not going to serve in the U.S. Army, right, U.S. military. So there was a firm sort of understanding and belief in position I held.
So those were already discussions that you all had had beforehand. So,
Yes, but we didn't have details. It was just like there was just a basic understanding that we were going to resist that.
mhm.
So the question is, how are we going to resist it? So in General Baker's case, we organized. We mobilized as many people as we could, and like try to publicize the efforts of the military to draft numbers of people in general, right? Because we were part of the whole anti-war movement. Our group was firmly part of that movement.
Were any of your siblings drafted? Since I mean, you have majority brothers. Were there any of them in the age group, or did they also experience that?
Well, Lucius was a student. He was in that age bracket, and so was James, and he went to civil uh, civil service, right? I mean, they're
So
alternative.
he
So
was drafted,
he was
and
no, he was no, he wasn't drafted. He was a student too. And so, but the short answer is no, none of us served. Only Lucius was attached to the military through ROTC and being through ROTC, release officers training, right? But he wasn't actually. Uh, so yeah, he was part of a reserve unit. So to continue with my story, I had, there have been other cases about different ways to resist. So I figured that my final way was that uh, I was I was going to resist by going going into exile, political exile. Right. So at that fast note, but so what happened is this: I received the letter. I reported to the induction center. I went through the physical. When they finished the physical,
what was the physical like? Can you explain that?
well,
What was it
first,
like for you? Like when you went in, can you talk a little bit about
oh, it was
what you
like,
remember?
okay, it was like going to the doctor's office where they ask you questions, about, any symptoms of diseases. And, they weigh you, and yeah, they just ask you some basically medical kinds of sort of questions, and that's sort of like a kind of a superficial kind of examination. It's not like a real in-depth uh, metaphysical. Then they gave a mental aptitude test, and they gave you a sort of a, a booklet that you had the questions. Right, it's just like taking, almost taking like an SAT test or something.
Mhm.
And so what I did is I didn't on the bubble sheet. I just wrote out my declaration of resistance, and I condemned the United States for their racism and for their imperialism. And then after that was done, then I left. That was it. And then
What is your, to you, you said you wrote your declaration of resistance.
yes, and I just
Explain that.
okay. I stated the reason why I will not serve in the U.S. Army, and I said that essentially that blacks are an oppressed group, oppressed by a government that's controlled by white racist capitalists, right? And I in no way would serve that group that controls this country. And then I mentioned something about the history of enslavement of Black folks, the segregation that this country has never recognized the human rights of Black folks. And someone to go until they fight, they go over and fight for so-called freedom and democracy in Southeast Asia when we don't have it right here in the US, right? It's foolish, right? And so I made statements like that, making my point that I'm not going to serve, and these are the reasons why.
Did you want someone to read it, or were there any particular ideal actions that you wanted someone to take away by? Okay.
I was just wanting to explain why I'm not going to serve.
So it was more for yourself, or like something that you needed to do, or
something right now. The reason, I mean, it was an intelligence test, so I had to write down something intelligent, right? And so something, they want a bubble sheet to measure IQ. I have my own ways of measuring IQ. That's my IQ. I'm smart enough to know that I'm not going to be cannon fodder by and used by you to go over there and fight over 88,000 miles to go over a fight for you against the people that I really support. Right? So that was a demonstration of intelligence. And I use my own kind of framework and how I define intelligence and how it relates to the situation that I'm in. And I'll determine the context, not the oppressor. And what happened, and in the meantime, I had a backup. I said that another level of resistance is going to be I'm going to go through the procedure of conscientious objection. Yeah, so there's a procedure for that. So I had two tracks. One, basically, I'm going to make that in terms of the induction center. And then I'm going to take the next level and go through the procedure of conscientious objection to military service. And so using that procedure, I indicated that I was summoned to appear before my local draft board, which was comprised of about 5 or 6 old white racist men. Okay? And at that, before the full board, they're there to say, to give your reasons for objecting to military service. Right? Now remember that these old men, I mean, if I had appeared in their neighborhoods, they would call the police, okay? I mean, that's the kind of contempt that they have for Black folks. Right? And you can get that vibe, you can sense that. Yeah. So like, slave, why are you disobeying your master? Okay, that was it. That's what the situation was. And I explained to them, no, I'm not going to serve, for basically the same reasons that I stated. So knowing that they wouldn't accept whatever I said, they weren't going to accept it. So I might as well, give the so-called real reasons. I mean, I wasn't going to say, well, it's against my religion, I'm a Jehovah's Witness or something. No, forget that. I'll tell them straight away, why am I going to serve? And so I was depending on the timing of the procedure to give me time to go for my real option, which was to get out of the country and go to Canada. And then I was thinking, well, many went to get out of the country, all I had to do is about 10 or 15 minutes to go across the Ambassador Bridge from Detroit to Windsor, Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I said, well, Windsor's too close. That's just about a 15-minute kind of a ride across the bridge, right? So I said, well, and then the next big city was Toronto, but there were a lot of there were a number of resistors in Toronto. But the real reason, but I went to Montreal, and the main reason I went to Montreal is that I had met some radical French Canadians in Quebec who were part of the left. And so, and then there was a French Canadian who visited me in Detroit, and he was just passing through. So I had a contact. And
How, where did you build this relationship with these French radicals?
it was not a real close relationship. They were in
Yeah, but how were you like aware of them? Was it like an event, or was this through school, or?
and we met in Havana, in Cuba.
So this is all through your Cuba trip. So these are
Right. So,
okay.
yeah, this is through the Cuba trip. Okay.
Okay. So when you received your draft letter, did you like immediately contact them to say like, hey, I think I'm gonna be coming by?
No, I didn't do that immediately. But as I went to the induction center and conscientious objector, then I said that I'm going to leave the country. And the most convenient move to make is to go to Canada. The most convenient was just go to Windsor, but I wanted to get further away.
Did you have a car at the time, and that's how you're able to get to Montreal, or?
No, I was a friend drove me to Montreal.
Oh, all the way?
Yep.
Did you go with like anybody, or you didn't go with General Baker or any of your
No.
friends that were also drafted? Why did you decide to go by yourself?
Well, I thought that a few people at that time, who knew what my move was, I thought the better. So I really didn't share that move with many of my friends. I say I'll wait until I get there and then contact them.
But why did you decide to do it by yourself? Like, why are you doing it all by yourself? Why are you alone?
Well, who would go with me, and for what purpose?
I guess like your friends that are also being drafted, if they wanted to like also seek asylum in Canada, if that was something that they wanted, or if you had like a partner at the time or a sibling, or because that just seems like because you keep talking about this collectivist, but then a lot of your actions that you're making is very independent. So not like it's clashing, but there's this duality of how you're functioning through. So just wondering, again, you're talking about this collective, but then on your personal note, you seem to isolate yourself. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I had a friend who was interested in going to Quebec, and so it was was something that they were interested in doing, and I made the arrangement. And so when I got there, and they were just gonna like go there and kind of drop me off to these friends, to these French Canadians, right? And there was a family, a husband and a wife. I think they may have a kid there in Montreal, and I'd already, because they had a friend who they used me as a reference for that friend when that friend came from Quebec and was traveling through the country and coming into the U.S. They said, well, we have a friend we met in Cuba, and his name is Luke Tripp, and he lives in Detroit. So when you go enter the U.S., coming from there, you guys, you may want to stop by his house. So he stopped by, we slept a couple nights, and because he was, traveling there. So they made a reference for him to stop. And I said, oh, okay. And so I knew their address and all, right? And so that's why, and then I sort of hooked up with them. And once there, they had there was a white draft resistor who they were friends with. And they introduced me to him. And he was a student, he was a graduate student at McGill University. And so he referred me, got me a job with a professor in the sociology department at the University of McGill as a programmer, right? Because I had, I sort of got some little computer skills, So I started working. So that was my first kind of job, part-time job, and I got it through the white student resistor, who was a graduate student in the sociology department at McGill University. And then I so at least had a job, and I had enough money for an apartment. So I didn't stay with this French family, and I stayed a couple of days with this other white resistor. He was a married guy, and we looked around for an apartment, and so I moved to a house apartment, and so I had that part-time job, and I had enough money with me for several months rent. And so I just pretty much lived alone while I was in Quebec. Then later, about a month or two later, I applied for several jobs. I went job hunting. And I finally landed a job at Northern Electric, company, telephone company, in the engineering department. Okay. So, yeah, I had my degree in unified science and physics. And
so sorry, at that time you already had you had your undergrad from Wayne State.
Right. So I graduated in 19 it was in this I graduated in 65. Yeah, from and so fortunately I had computer skills and math skills, and I was able to get a job in the engineering department doing as a computer programmer. And that's the main. So I had two jobs really. I had that part-time job with the university professor processing this data, and then I had a job in the Northern Electric telephone company.
So what tasks did you do in that role?
Well, first of all, the companies, you go to, they have a school inside their department. I mean, a training unit. And so the first several months, I was just in training. Okay, here's this telephone company, and we're training you to how to program the processes for our company. And you write programs to basically sort components. It's just like, and today when they begin to talk about an algorithm, okay, so that's essentially what we're doing in our algorithm. Right? Once you get inputs, how do you sort these things out, right? And put them in different sort of categories, right? So the machine, so we're engineers and all that. We're trying to really develop these algorithms to do automatic functions, So that's what I was doing.
So how long were you in Montreal?
I was in Montreal. I went to maybe the fall of fall of 66, I think. 67, 16. Yeah, the fall of 66. And I was there until March of 68. Yeah, because I graduated from the university in 1966. Yeah. So
Did you know when you were there, did you meet any other African Americans that were also seeking asylum from the draft?
there was one other guy, which was a casual acquaintance. I didn't know him very well. I forgot the occasion.
Yeah, but you weren't like the only
Yeah,
identifying person.
I was by myself. Okay. There was no other,
Yeah, sorry, I meant with I was wondering if there were just other people in the community that were also taking kind of similar paths that you might have come across, or if there were other African Americans in Canada, how they were navigating Montreal at that time.
no. So I had this white friend who was the graduate sociology student, and then the other friends I had were friends on the job, and they were mainly engineers or like my in the department from India. So my closest friends were Indian from India.
So what did your activism look like while you were there for, you said roughly you were there for 2 years, right?
I was there from August 1966
Oh,
until March 1968. Okay. So that's about a year and a half or so.
mm-hmm.
And while there, I was politically active because, first of all, I assumed that the US government, the FBI, and all knew where I was. So I didn't go into hiding to keep a low.
And how were you aware that the FBI were aware of your location at that time?
I assumed they did.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Because I didn't receive any communications from them. Right.
Did your family experience any communication when you had left?
I don't think so. No. And I think, I think what the U.S. was attempting to do, given my very active opposition to U.S. policy, both domestic and foreign, and the U.S. Military was having a lot of problems with people who were drafted into the military, people who didn't want to be there, and they were causing a lot of problems within the military, right? Because when you're trying to have a large number of folks in the military who don't want to be there, there's going to be a whole lot of discipline problems, all right? So I think that's, I'm assuming that that's one of the reasons why they really didn't pursue me. Mm-hmm. And I figure that maybe it's better to have them maybe in Canada than in the US protesting. Mm-hmm. Okay, or so, I'm just assuming that might have been their logic. But while in Canada, the Canadians had anti-Vietnam war demonstrations, and I participated in them. And then, of course, there was a worker strike at where I was working at Northern Electric Company by not some the engineering unit, but by some other staff members, and they had a picket line, and I say, hey, wait, I do not cross picket lines. I'm a supporter of workers, right? So I didn't report to work while they were picketing, and what I did is, with the supervisor and all, I said, well, I was sick. So I used that as a pretext for being sick. I mean, it was true at one level. I was sick of these people being abused and not given a fair wage. And that made me sick. So I mean, that's how.
Can you describe a little bit more when it said it made you sick? Can you describe that a little bit more?
when I say make sick, anytime I see oppression, it makes me sick. It makes me angry.
Is
Okay.
it like a physical, like, is it in your stomach? What?
No, I don't get stomach aches. You know, it's usually
Some people do though when you're really stressed out.
right,
Like people can have
right,
stomach
right, right,
aches and like, it can
right.
make you feel sick.
No,
Um,
it made me feel angry. That's what it does. You know, so it was made angry, and then plus on the basis of principle, right? Here are these workers, you know, common working folks, struggling for a fair wage in better working conditions, and I support that. So I'm not going to undermine what they're attempting to do, you know, by walking across the picket line. So
did the people that you were like that were experiencing that, did they have similar like sentiment as yourself?
I didn't know the people. I don't know their names. I don't know. All I know is I knew what they were doing, and I understood why they were doing it. There was a way of communicating with their employers, and they wanted a fair deal from their employers. I knew that much, and I've been an employee. Matter of fact, I was an employee then. Okay, so I take the point of view of the employees rather than those of the employers. And so I thought that their struggles and their efforts were legitimate and justified. So it was for those, for on the basis of those values and that perspectives, that explains my behavior.
And what made you come back to the US after that year and a half
Oh,
time?
well, nothing made me come back. I wanted to come back.
I said what, yeah, like I guess what made
Okay,
you
right.
want to go, like what made you come back?
Okay,
Like
right,
what
right.
made you want
So
to come back,
you know,
right?
part of my plan was short term. I said that the draft age is up to the age of 26, from 18 to 26. You could be drafted. And I said that when I turned 27, I'm coming back because that's the only reason I went to Quebec
Mhm.
is to basically as a way of dealing with the draft and the way I chose to deal with the draft. So I didn't go to Canada, Quebec to seek a job or so I thought that Quebec was a better place to live. And it was none of that. That was not my motivation. So I understood what my motivation was. And that was basically to be someplace until I pass my 20 until I turned 27. That was the only reason. And I felt my really place was back in the US, being involved in the struggle. So I wasn't seeking a better, more comfortable, peaceful life. That was not in the cards. And so that's why I came. My birthday was in February. So in March, you know, when the weather kind of broke, right, better traveling thing, my brother James drove up, you know, and stayed with him, and I rode back with him. And see, while I was in Quebec, my friends came up. You know, John Williams came up, stayed with me. Sterling and other friends came up. Richard and James came up. So folks, they were coming up. You know, they came
What
up.
kind of things did you do with them?
Well, in 1967, they had the Montreal Expo, you know. So they had the big expo in Canada. And so that was a big, you know, tourist
What were
attraction.
they? What was an expo of?
Exposition of Montreal. You know, it's just like, for instance, you can have Minneapolis can have a expose, expose. You know, in other words, they have a lot of activities and ceremonies planned for that. And that's like they have Minneapolis fair, right? So people come up there, it's an attraction.
Mhm.
So they had Montreal World Expo. It was a World Expo, right? So you had pavilions, you had Cuban pavilions, Russian pavilions, all these other pavilions. So it was like a global affair, you know. And so that was an opportunity, I think, Richard and James came up and they had I know Richard wants a whole lot of big furry bears and so it was like a carnival thing. So it was an opportunity for folks who want to go out there and see Montreal, go to the expo and participate in those activities. So it was that
When
kind of
you when your friends and family were visiting you, was there like a stronger sense of like safety, or was there less experience of racism as like Black men experiencing like fun and joy and like that you're caring for each other? Did you feel safer where you were in like Montreal versus in Detroit? And what was it? Yeah.
Mm. There was definitely much less tension in Montreal.
Hmm.
And people, my experience is people relate more to you as an individual. Yeah. So it was, I mean, the heavy duty kind of stereotype. And the other, and the point is that you're not an object of attention. Okay. I mean, people kind of mind their own business. You mind your own business. Okay. And all that. So it's not like people embracing you and feeling good. No, just, you do your thing, I do my thing, right? It's not like in the US and you in white space or say, what are you doing here? Right? You don't belong here. So it's more, I guess, uh, what happens is that in the US, there's a stereotypical dynamic. I mean, so people kind of relate to you in how they know you. They're using the stereotypes to as a way of navigating. Oh, you Black, navigation says stay away, right?
Hmm.
In Montreal, you Black, hey, so what, right? I mean, yeah, and they just ignore you. So, I mean, not ignore you, but you.
Do you feel like or how did you navigate your identity, like in Montreal versus Detroit versus Cuba? Did you notice like how people treated your identity being different? So I think when I've moved and like traveled in different places,
Mhm.
people interact with my phenotypes, right? So they're gonna
Yeah.
interact with you if I'm like Latin, however they're perceiving me to be. So
Mhm.
how did interactions what was that like? And how did other people's definitions of your identity kind of, yeah, how was
Okay.
it? Yeah.
Well, number one, I mean, let's look at spaces of interaction. Most of my day was spent on a job. And as I mentioned before, my closest friends, Canadian friends, were Indian because they're in
Did any
Indian.
of them think that you were like other ethnicities besides being African American? Like, I don't know, were you ever or have you ever experienced that? And just because you again you have, yeah,
Okay.
just interested.
Well, there were in our unit, there were two other Black people, like two other Black Canadians,
Hmm.
one woman and one man. And like with the man and the woman, we just had a casual relationship. We didn't have any kind of
Did
special
they
connection.
identify you quickly like as an American born person, or did anyone ever perceive you like were surprised that you like weren't Canadian? Was that ever a thing?
Nope.
Because that's happened to me of like, oh, they're surprised you're not from where they're from.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
that, because sometimes a lot like you can kind of profile Americans based on like their dress and how they act.
Hmm.
So I wonder if you just
Hmm.
exuded American identity when you functioned in that space. I wonder
So
if you
inside
did.
this engineering department, there was another, I know another, yeah, a friendly guy, friends. He was Norwegian, right?
Hmm.
And at first, he had this accent, which I interpreted as a German accent, right? And so, um, well, you don't expect, Germans to be that kind of friendly, right? But this guy
That's
was
racist. Okay.
okay. I mean, they got to standoffish, and all that sort of thing. But he was smiling and friendly. And it turns out that he was Norwegian. So, I mean, I got along with, like,
So you're learning a lot about just the different diversities within
yeah, because
white
Canada,
men. Yeah.
again, is very, very diverse. And most of those folks are immigrants and recent, just like
Yeah.
these guys.
It seems like your first experiences with political action introduced you to a community of like a very international community versus how
Yeah.
you were growing up. It seemed very homogeneous.
Mhm.
Yeah, it seems like that influenced a lot of your belief systems.
Mhm.
Do you think so, or no, or yes? Or I
Yeah,
mean,
because, I always kind of consider myself kind of open-minded anyway. I wasn't, my friends and circles and all that were never very narrow, right?
mhm,
And I just, on the one hand, I'll join the All Black organization for political reasons and all that, but I didn't exclude, folks from my social circle, right? So different circles meet certain kind of different needs and addresses certain kind of different kind of situations. Okay, so but the general climate in Montreal was fairly open,
mhm,
and I didn't feel any, you're right, uh, intense anti-blackness per se, right?
mhm,
And most folks just dealt with you as how they perceived you, uh, and say, I present myself, my phenotype is black and all that. So they just,
mhm,
but it wasn't didn't seem that significant in terms of uh, how they would relate. And the U.S. is always very significant in terms of that. White folks, maybe they'll try to be extra polite, but I mean, there's a little tension there, and sometimes people cover it up. Sometimes not until, well, what happens is you probably know your own experience with white folks, particularly here in Minnesota. Is gradually melting. First it's kind of solid, and the more they know you as an individual, it melts. And so it's a whole kind of a process. Yeah. With in Canada, that period is well, first of all, it's not as sort of, you can kind of detect it, but again, it's like people are not paying super attention to it. Yeah.
mhm.
And so, in terms of being black, it certainly wasn't a plus, but it was not a significant negative, right? So blackness is not a plus, but
in in
so
that living
so you,
environment in
so you
Montreal,
just have
but
to
there
deal
were.
with to what extent is it a negative, right?
Mhm.
And it can be a plus on an intimate relationship, right? I mean, so that's a different kind of relationship, but generally social, you know, uh, 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 if it's neutral, you got to win. Okay, if it's neutral, you got to win.
My last question is, what's your perspective on asylum for African Americans, on descendants of African Americans, since we are people that were enslaved in the US but never received like asylum or support from the historical traumas that we've experienced. And I think with the current murders that are happening repetitively with young Black men, and you decided to leave the US when you were being recruited to fight the Japanese War. So I guess what do you think
Now the
safe
Vietnamese
the
war,
Vietnam, sorry, what did I say?
Japanese.
Japanese, sorry. The Vietnam War. What do you think that safety could look the same way, and like the choices that you made, or what does safety look like for Black male identifying people like yourself in this current time?
Okay, let me see if I understand your question.
What does
First,
safety, or how do you think people of Black people can be safe from trauma?
okay. Uh, First of all, it has to be safe from trauma. Was a lot of internal things you have to do in terms of interpreting things in such a way that is not negative, is not detrimental to your mental health. Right? So, what do I mean by that? Well, if they're going to suffer, Black folks are going to suffer a lot of more trauma if they attempt to be accepted and get into the world of the oppressor, right? So if you're trying to kind of operate according to the standards of the oppressor, the values of the oppressor, you're gonna stay messed up. Okay. So you got to break loose and see who you are. It's just like when I told you the story about the draft. You know, I am not like a servant placed on here to serve the military, to serve the white power structure. Right?
Do you think it would be like, you made a choice to leave the US? Do you think that it's like a good decision for Black people to leave the US at this time? What do you,
No,
how come?
we are invested for 400 years of labor in uh, investment in this
What does
country.
that investment mean? What does that mean?
Well, part of that investment is by ancestors in terms of the economic development of this country. Blood, sweat, and tears. That's an investment. And all what did they get for the investment? Pain.
I mean, like, they didn't invest though. They were brutalized. Like
They were brutalized,
Mhm.
but their labor was an investment in the economic development of this country.
Yeah, not their investment.
Right.
So, but
Yeah.
that's an investment that they made.
All right. And then, of course, even in my generation, and my parents, remember, I lived over 27 years under official American apartheid. I got involved to fight against American apartheid. They had laws, right? That says, are you Black folks? Remember, in my generation, I was sitting in the back of the bus, okay? They still have segregated schools. In my generation, I was born in Tennessee, but I could not attend the University of Tennessee. That's official American apartheid, right? And see, all of those institutions and universities and all, you know what? Black folks pay taxes for those.
Mhm.
So all those resources, educational resources, and recreational resources, and job resources, we invested in that in terms of our taxes, in terms of the work, but we got no benefit from it, right?
So why stay?
So
Then why? So you're saying that, like, well, you're forced into this investment. That's what I feel like I'm hearing. So I'm not. I guess
yeah, right.
if you're
I
forced
mean,
into this
yeah.
investment, why would you stay?
So the question is, why wouldn't I stay? I mean, where do I belong?
Mhm.
Where?
Yeah. Do you think a space exists where, like, you think Black people can have a sense of belongingness besides, like, kind of curated spaces
Well,
that are very deliberate, like organizations and stuff like that?
well, look, Black folks already got a sense of where home is.
Mm.
Their home is their real home, the home they know, and all that. It's not in Africa. It's not in Haiti. It's not in all these other places. A lot of these people over there are trying to get here. Okay, all right, okay. And Black folks, when they begin to talk about, when I talk about home, talk about Detroit, Michigan, right? I mean, blah, blah, your roots and your loved ones and all that. Yeah, look, a lot of Black folks have enough money to buy airplane tickets to go elsewhere and all that. Do you see them rushing down the airport, buying a one-way ticket to Africa, or to Haiti, or to Brazil?
I guess, and again, I'm
I'm
pushing
just
a little bit, but
all right.
you
So
know.
the community, so the Black community is telling you something straight away. Those with the resources to make the move are not talking about pulling up stakes. They're thinking about buying homes here. They're thinking about sending their kids to universities and colleges right here. So Black folks, Black community is not going anywhere. They say this is, their grandparents, their great grandparents, they've been here for 14 years, and they're not going to pull up any more than all these white folks going to pull up. These white folks are not going to pull back and go back to Europe and all that. No, all these Latinx folks, they're not going to pull up and go back to their Latin American countries. No, these Asian folks, they're not going to pull up and go back to those Asian countries. No, the majority of them are not. No. Do you see any kind of significant stream in any of those groups getting out? And Native Americans, this is ancestral home for thousands of years, right? And so in terms of people saying we're going to solve our problems by just, leaving the country in mass, no, nobody's doing that. And then because people have a stake here. They say, look, my house is here. My job is here. Mm-hmm. And to tell the truth, that maybe the high standard of living I can realize is right here, not someplace else. Mm-hmm. Only people who can realize maybe a higher standard of living are multimillionaires who can do well. Other working kind of folks, no, they go to Mexico, there's going to be a cut in pay, in living standards and all. They go back to Africa, if they're not wealthy, it's going to be a cut in all of those things. And everybody wants a base level of material comfort. All right. Everybody strive for that. And they know that that's a greater possibility right here in the United States than most other folks. Now, if you're wealthy and all that, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. But middle class folks, no. And if it just think, you just take a survey of Black folks, how many of are getting ready to, and I had a close friend who just ran the rave about the US, oh, I hate it here and all that. I'm leaving. And I heard that same tune for 3 decades. And that person even didn't leave Minnesota, let alone the US.
Okay? It's like they just aren't taking good.
People just vent and talk that talk. But, so, yeah, as you know, just observe behavior. Okay, I hear what they're saying. Now I'm going to look at what they're doing. Now, if what they're doing doesn't match what they're saying, then maybe I shouldn't think that what they're saying is credible. Okay, mm-hmm. They're just blowing smoke. So sometimes you be a little kind and just listen, but you don't take it seriously because they're not taking it seriously.
That was my last question. So I think we hit an hour now.
Oh, okay. You're looking good.
Thanks.
As always, I'll stop recording. Well, I guess we can't talk with Conrad today. Let me see how I shut this thing off. Record.
You should, next to share screen, there's pause, stop, record.
Okay, let me see. Share screen. Okay.
And go to the right and press stop recording.
Let me see. Okay. I don't see there's any. I hear record.
Oh, sorry. Maybe it's mine.